Alrighty, in today's video we're going to see how 30 different macOS games perform on this new M3 iMac. Enjoy. I need to very quickly address something. There are some games in this video that will launch in 120Hz mode and composite mode. This is due to a bug with macOS and my 4K 60 Pro capture card. This display is 60Hz, it is not 120Hz. This should barely affect the performance of these games, and even if it does, it's a million times less than internal screen recordings. I hope Apple is watching this video and can fix this in a future macOS update. It's a minor thing, but I thought I would share. Alright, thank you. Our first game is Lies of P. Lies of P is a Metal 3 game, with Metal effects support and HDR. NeoWiz have optimized this game very well for modern Macs. At 1080p high, with Metal effects on balanced, it's hitting 40 to 60 plus FPS. At 1080p medium, with Metal effects set to balanced, it generally receives 50 to 70 plus FPS. I noticed it has the biggest issues during the Krat Central Station location and during big combat sequences. You can play at higher resolutions than 1080p, but Metal effects is needed to make this possible. For example, 1440p or 2K, medium settings with Metal effects on performance. This provides 40 to 60 plus FPS. Or at 2160p, 4K, medium settings with Metal effects on performance, you'll see about 30 FPS. Metal effects makes a sizable difference in Lies of P. Don't be afraid to play around with it for a mix of visuals and performance. Keep in mind, this game can use over 8GB of memory when higher settings are enabled, so you may have performance issues on an M3 iMac with only 8GB of memory. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of only 36 degrees with this game. Resident Evil Village by Capcom is well optimized on Mac, all the way back to M1. It's a Metal 3 game with Metal effects support and HDR. At 1080p, prioritized graphics preset and Metal effects on quality, we're seeing 55 to 90 plus FPS. You'll notice big FPS drops during large shooting sequences or big explosions. You can quite comfortably play at 1440p, 2K, balanced preset with Metal effects on quality. This will offer about 40 to 70 plus FPS. I'd say this game is playable at a lower FPS, thanks to the action being rather slow paced. 2160p 4K is possible at a balanced preset and Metal effects on quality, but you'll be limited to about 30 FPS. Metal effects provides great performance in this title. Keep in mind, quality mode uses temporal upscaling, while performance uses spatial. While performance provides a big FPS boost, it provides terrible image quality. I don't suggest it. This game can use over 8GB of memory when high settings are enabled, so you may have performance issues on an M3 iMac with only 8GB of memory. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of only 39 degrees with this game. Moving on, we have Baldur's Gate 3 by ELEX and Larian Studios. Baldur's Gate 3 supports Metal 2.1 and AMD FSR 1.0. At 1080p Ultra with AMD FSR set to quality, it sees anywhere from 30 to 60 plus FPS. It's very unbalanced. But playing at ultra graphics is a must for this game. Whereas at medium with AMD FSR on quality, it's 30 to 80 plus FPS. which is a bit better. If I was you, I would actually disable AMD FSR here, as it provides a muddy image quality at any mode. Yes, you'll see a massive FPS drop, but I think this game is more about visuals over performance. Keep in mind, this game requires 10 GB of memory, so you may have performance issues on an M3 iMac with only 8 GB of memory. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of 43 degrees with this game. No Man's Sky by Hello Games is not a challenging game to run. This is a Metal 3 game with Metal effects too. Sadly, it's missing HDR on Mac though. At 1080p high and Metal effects on quality, it gets 60 to 150 plus FPS. Exploring planets on foot definitely lowers the FPS quite dramatically, while exploring space often sees well over 100 FPS. But this is just for light space battle encounters. I haven't played much of this game. 1440p or 2K, high settings with Metal effects on quality provides 40 to 90 plus FPS. You might want to put Metal effects to balanced if you always want over 60 FPS. 2160p 4K, high settings with Metal effects on balanced provides about 30 FPS. 30 FPS is not for some, I get that, but the visuals do look quite nice here, even if it's upscaled from a lower resolution with Metal effects. To be fair, the game runs well even without Metal effects, but this tech definitely does help to make some locations in the game easier to run. Just whatever you do, don't use Metal effects spatial. The image quality is absolutely disgusting. It's very similar to AMD FSR 1.0 tech. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of 40 degrees with this game. Let's take a look at ELEX 2 by THQ. This is not a Metal 3 game. It runs on Metal 2.4, but it still has Metal effects support. At 1080p high with Metal effects, the game sees about 25 to 50 FPS. It has the biggest issues when exploring cities or largely condensed areas, but sees decent performance in some open areas. At 1080p medium with Metal effects on quality, it's 25 to 50 plus FPS. Not very different, but overall the average FPS will be a little higher. Metal effects doesn't have a big impact on performance in this game, sadly, but it's still worth using for just a tiny bit of extra performance. Since it uses temporal upscaling, the image quality isn't noticeably different. The game is unable to reach 60 FPS on this iMac, even at 900p medium settings, and with Metal effects. ELEX is a modern game, and it demands significant power from the GPU. It's definitely not the most optimized game out there, but still it comes much better than completely unoptimized Mac games that we will see next with Unreal Engine. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of only 40 degrees with this game. Cyan's Firmament will soon support ray tracing on M3 chipsets. It supports Metal 2.1, HDR, and Unreal Engine 4.27+. The App Store version has Metal effects and AMD FSR 1.0, while on Steam, it only has AMD FSR 1.0 support. I don't know why. Anyway, at 1080p Ultra with Metal effects on balanced, the game sees 15 to 50 FPS. In the St. Andrew world, it's unplayable, well below 30 FPS. Then in the Curavale Bluff or Gilliston world, it can be up to 50 FPS. At 1080p medium with Metal effects on balanced, the game sees 25 to 60 plus FPS. In the St. Andrew level, it's still usually well below 30 FPS. Then in the Curravale Bluff or Drilliston world, it can be up to 70 plus FPS. It's just unbalanced, man. Metal effects makes a sizable difference in some locations, but in the St. Andrew world, it doesn't save performance. The game uses over 10 GB of memory, even at 720p. Thankfully, my machine has 24 GB of memory, but I imagine you might have even worse performance with an 8 GB config. AMD FSR 1.0 also provides slightly better performance than Metal Effects, but this might be due to Metal Effects using temporal upscaling. I can't imagine ray tracing working well here, unless Cyan does some heavy optimization in some scenes. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of 42 degrees with this game. Cyan's Myst will also soon support ray tracing on Mac. The game supports Metal 2.1, HDR, Unreal Engine 4, and AMD FSR 1.0. Unlike Firmament, this one runs much better on Mac, but it's definitely not as challenging to run. At 1080p Epic with AMD FSR on quality, the game sees 45 to 100 plus FPS. On the main island, it's up to 60 to 80 FPS, then in the Stone Ship Age, it can be up to 100 plus FPS. Or in the Channel Wood Age, it's often down to 45 FPS. Or you can play at 2160p, 4K, Epic, but you must use AMD FSR balanced mode to make this possible. This provides about 30 FPS, but the game looks stunning on the iMac's display. I can see ray tracing working quite nicely on this M3 iMac in the near future. AMD FSR also makes a big difference to performance here, but be sure to use anything above balanced because otherwise the game looks absolutely awful. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of 41 degrees with this game. Here is the 2023 Layers of Fear remake, powered by Unreal Engine 5.1.1. It comes with Metal 3, Metal Effects, and TSR upscaling support and HDR support. At 1080p high, with Metal Effects on quality, it gets 30 to 50 FPS. It's not amazing, but it's not absolutely terrible. It's just that the frame pacing is awful. Even at medium settings with Metal Effects on quality, the average FPS can be a little higher in some scenes, but the frame pacing is still off. You need to use Metal Effects performance at 1080p medium to make the game more enjoyable. Now you get up to and sometimes over 60 FPS. It looks like the game uses temporal upscaling, so the image quality isn't completely ruined. Layers of Fear will soon support ray tracing on M3 chips, but I can't imagine it working well here on this iMac, unless Blooper Team do some heavy optimization. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of 39 degrees with this game. Fort Solis is another Unreal Engine 5 game, version 5.2.1 to be exact. It was ported to Mac by Playjoy Studios and published by Fallen Leaf. It supports Nanite and Lumen on M2 and above chips. Despite Metal 3 and Metal Effects support, it's unplayable on this M3 iMac. Here is 720p low settings with Metal Effects on performance, and it gets only 20 to 50 FPS. Here is a comparison of the game at 1080p high and medium with different metal effects settings, and the game is not playable. Metal effects cannot save this one. What you're going to find is that Unreal Engine games are often poorly optimized on Mac, and most devs just ship a Mac version without even looking at it. I don't understand how the developer felt comfortable shipping Fort Solis to Mac like this. If it's unplayable on base M3, it leaves no hope for weaker chips. The Medium is an Unreal Engine 4 game. It's also unplayable on this M3 iMac and most Macs out there. At first glance, I suppose it runs okay, but it sees similar frame rates at 1080p, high, medium, and low, which is weird. Then, the game has massive issues during its split world sequences. The FPS drops to an unplayable number, even at 720p lowest settings with metal effects on performance. This is the same story on every Mac, even a powerful Mac Studio. Metal effects and Metal 3 just can't save this game either during those ridiculously challenging scenes. At the end of the day, this game is poorly optimized, even on Windows PC to begin with, so we can't expect miracles on Mac. It's also missing HDR on the Mac version, if you wanted to know. Total War PHARAOH is Feral Interactive's latest title and is powered by Metal 3. It doesn't have metal effects support. The game comes with a handy benchmark feature. At 1080p high, it sees 44.5 FPS in battle, 57.2 FPS in campaign, and 42.4 FPS in siege. If you want over 60 FPS at 1080p high, put the resolution scale to 58%. This provides 65.6 FPS in battle, 91.8 FPS in campaign, and 63.5 FPS in siege. At 1080p medium, it sees 80.7 FPS in battle, 97.9 FPS in campaign, and 79.3 FPS in siege. This is my preferred way to play the game. You can also play at 1440p, 2K, high, but be sure to put the resolution scaling to 85%. This provides 35 FPS in battle, 43.7 FPS in campaign, and 33.4 FPS in siege. This is a good option for people who prefer pristine visuals over high performance. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of 42 degrees with this game. I have not played much of Disney Dreamlight Valley on Mac, so don't take these results as concrete performance. Anyway, Disney Dreamlight Valley is a Metal 3 game, but it has no metal effects support. The game seems to adapt its frame rate to the refresh rate of your monitor. On this iMac, it's 60 Hz, so it won't go above this, even with VSync disabled. At 1080p Ultra, it sees about 60 FPS, and at 1440p or 2K high settings, it's similar results. I tried the game at the iMac's native resolution, 2520p, and it sees about 30 to 40 FPS. Overall, the game runs okay here, but it has awful frame pacing. This is a common problem with Unity titles on Apple products. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of only 40 degrees with this game. Arma 3 is a huge game, content-wise, and I don't have the time to look at it very in depth for this video. I've just looked at some single player levels, so take these results lightly. At 1080p high, it sees about 55 to 60 plus FPS. And at 1080p medium, it now sees 70 to 80 plus FPS. This game is in beta for Mac. You have the option to launch a Rosetta or an experimental Apple Silicon native version. The Rosetta version actually has better performance right now, and sometimes it can be significant. Virtual Programming is the developer of Arma 3 on Mac, and I hope in the future they can make the native version better and add AMD FSR or metal effects. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of 43 degrees with this game. Isonzo is an interesting Mac port. While it's optimized for Apple Silicon, it's not a native app. It runs under Rosetta. It's also the first Mac game to support AMD FSR 2.0, a big win for Mac gamers. The game also seems to adapt its frame rate to the refresh rate of your monitor. On this iMac, it's 60 Hz, so it won't go above this, even with VSync disabled and an unlimited FPS cap enabled. Anyway, at 1080p high settings with AMD FSR on balanced, it's 50 to 60 FPS. I'm quite happy with this. If you want closer to 60 FPS, put the game to medium settings with AMD FSR on balanced. It's just strange that the game can't go above 60 FPS, and there are noticeable frame pacing issues on this iMac. AMD FSR 2.0 in this case only makes a difference if you're aiming for 60 FPS on this machine. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of 43 degrees with this game. Rockfish Games told me EVERSPACE 2 runs on Metal 1. I find this hard to believe though. For starters, the game is native on Apple Silicon, and to be native you must use at least Metal 2.1 as the minimum, and they are using Unreal Engine 4.27.2, which doesn't even support Metal 1, so Metal 1, I don't think so. Anyway, at 1080p high with AMD FSR on balanced, we're seeing about 45 FPS. While at 1080p medium settings, AMD FSR on balanced, it's usually about 60 plus FPS. The game supports AMD FSR 1.0, and it looks pretty awful in this game, but it's definitely useful to make the game play more enjoyable. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of only 41 degrees with this game. Metro Exodus by 4A Games is powered by Metal 2.2 and Molten VK. At 1080p high, it sees 30 to 60 plus FPS. The game is set in multiple locations that take place indoors, outdoors, and so forth. Indoors, it can be up to 60 FPS, but outside, take here in the Caspian level, or here in Sam's story, it can be down to 40 or even 30 FPS. At 1080p medium, it's about 40 to 70 FPS. Indoors, it can be up to 60 plus FPS, but outside, take here in the Caspian level or here in Sam's story, down to 40 FPS. Overall, Metro Exodus has massive frame pacing issues no matter the settings. I imagine if Metal Effects was added and the game was native, it would be so much better. Now that M3 supports ray tracing, I wonder if 4A considers porting the Enhanced Edition to Mac, which adds support for ray tracing and HDR. I don't know if it would work well here on M3, but maybe M3 Pro and M3 Max. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of 42 degrees with this game. Here is another Feral Interactive game, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. It supports Metal 2.2 and HDR on Mac. The game comes with a handy benchmark feature. At 1080p high, it sees 38 FPS on average. At 1080p medium, it sees 39 FPS on average. It's strange that there is almost no difference compared to high. At 900p medium, it sees 49 FPS on average. I wish it was 60 FPS, and overall I just don't actually like playing this game at anything below 1080p. No. I doubt PHARAOH will ever update this game for Apple Silicon, as it's quite old now, but if they do, Metal Effects or AMD FSR would make all the difference and might allow for 60 FPS, even at 1080p. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of only 39 degrees with this game. Here we have another brilliant game ruined by Unreal Engine on Mac. This one was worked on by virtual programming. The Forgotten City is unplayable on this iMac. In fact, it's unplayable on every Mac, even a Mac Studio. For example, at 1080p medium, it's anywhere from 20 to 60 FPS. What's weird is that it's basically the same at 720p low with 50% scaling. Just look at this side-by-side comparison. What the bloody heck is going on, virtual programming? Fix this pile of goo! Here is Dying Light by Techland. Dying Light on Mac seems to adapt its frame rate to the refresh rate of your monitor. On this iMac it's 60Hz, so it won't go above this, even when I'm playing with an uncapped frame rate. Anyway, at 1080p high, it's a locked 60 FPS. I played for ages, and I could not get it to drop a beat. Cool. Weirdly, at 1440p or 2K high or medium settings, it saw about the same performance with 40 to 50 FPS. So definitely just play the game at 1080p high for a nice locked 60 FPS. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of only 40 degrees with this game. Psychonauts 2, let's do it. At 1080p high and medium, it sees similar results strangely, hitting anywhere from 40 to 60 FPS. If you want 60 FPS, you'll have to play at 900p medium with 70% scaling. The game plays much better on higher chips. I don't really suggest playing it on this iMac if I was you, but I don't know. It's entirely up to you. It's a good game. It's a really good game. Borderlands 3 runs on Metal 1, Rosetta 2, and Unreal Engine 4. At 1080p medium, it sees 39.60 FPS. If you want 60 FPS, I suggest playing at 1080p medium with 50% scaling. This provides 65.77 FPS. Up to you though, buddy, as the game looks pretty awful, especially on the iMac's large display. Or you can play at 900p medium for 47.20 FPS, but still a low resolution on this iMac, it just doesn't look good. Keep in mind, this game can use over 8GB of memory, so you may have performance issues on an M3 iMac with only 8GB of memory. My iMac reached the max outside surface temperature of 43 degrees with this game. Deus Ex: Mankind Divided was one of the first games to support Metal 2.0 on Mac, and it was one of PHARAOH's first games to support this framework too. Note, the performance HUD does not work with this title, so I am using an external frame rate capture tool to measure the performance. The game comes with a handy benchmark feature. At 1080p high, it sees 36 FPS on average. At 1080p medium, 44.2 FPS. I just play at high graphics as I think this game should be experienced with better visuals over framerate. Just my 2 cents though. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of only 38 degrees with this game. Disco Elysium was one of the first biggish games to run natively on Mac. It's worth noting before we get into this that this Unity game seems to adapt its frame rate to the refresh rate of your monitor. on this iMac at 60 Hz, so it won't go above this, even when I'm playing with an uncapped frame rate. At 1440p or 2K high settings, it's locked to 60 FPS. I didn't see any dips in my playtime. You can also play at 2160p, 4K high settings, but the frame rate will be quite a bit lower. The game is a visual feast, and I actually prefer playing at 4K despite the lower frame rate because it just looks really good on the iMac. It looks lovely. Civilization 6 is still being updated for macOS. It was just updated for Ventura, but Aspire continues to keep it as an Intel application, you bloody bastards. Anyway, the game comes with a handy benchmark feature. 1080p high, it sees an average frame time of 23.351 ms, which is basically 42 FPS for graphics, and an average turn time of 11.50 for AI. 1080p medium, it sees an average frame time of 15.593 ms, or 60 FPS for graphics, and an average turn time of 10.48 for AI. At 1440p or 2K medium, it sees an average frame time of 18.292 ms, or 54 FPS for graphics, and an average turn time of 10.27 for AI. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of only 40 degrees with this game. Humankind is still a pretty demanding Unity title. Keep in mind, I have no idea how to play these 4x strategy games, so take these results lightly. At 1080p simple, I'm seeing about 30 FPS. At 1080p fastest, 30 to 50 FPS. Or at 900p simple, 50 to 60 plus FPS. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of 40 degrees with this game. Not many know, but LOL now supports the Metal API, and it's not in beta form anymore. It's enabled by default. The performance is fantastic, I guess. Anyway, at 1080p medium, we're seeing up to and over 300 FPS. Or at 1080p very high, it's now up to 300 FPS. Or at 4K very high, it's well over 100 FPS. I think these results are pretty good, right? I'm playing offline against bots though. I really don't like this game, so don't take these results too seriously. NBA 2K24 Arcade Edition is the latest title in the world-renowned NBA 2K franchise. Obviously this is the arcade version, so the graphics are not on par with the PC and console version. The game has a max resolution of 1080p, which is very annoying, and a 60 FPS cap. It can easily hit a locked 60 FPS on this M3 iMac at ultra high settings. It's no sweat. I long for a new COD to arrive on Mac. Black Ops 3 is so old now. It's made even worse that Aspire has not updated this port since it launched. It's still running version 1.0.0 on Mac, and it has no crossplay with Windows PC. Anyway, at 1080p high, it sees about 45 to 60 plus FPS in both offline multiplayer and the zombies map, the Giant. If you want 60 FPS, play at 1080p high and put the resolution scaling to 80%. I'm a little impressed actually that it sees a respectable frame rate during a high zombies round. That's good. Good. Thank you. Keep in mind, this game often uses over 8 GB of memory, so you may have performance issues on an M3 iMac with only 8 GB of memory. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of 43 degrees with this game. Divinity Original Sin 2 is once again brought to you by Elvarels and Larian Studios. It supports Metal 2.1 and HDR on Mac. However, it runs through Rosetta on Apple Silicon. At 1080p Ultra, the FPS is 40 to 60 plus FPS. It's sad that it's not always 60 FPS. I still believe this game must be played at ultra graphics though, to enjoy its outstanding visuals. Another option is to play the game at 1440p or 2K Ultra. Yes, it's around 30 FPS, but with HDR enabled and the absolutely amazing backdrops in the game, it looks so good on this iMac. I just can't even express it in this video. There are many demanding scenes in this game, so 60 FPS is not possible at decent settings, unfortunately. My iMac reached a max outside surface temperature of 40 degrees with this game. Our last game to look at is Farming Simulator 2022 by Giants Software. While I understand Farming Simulator 22 might not be for everyone, it's a very demanding PC game and it's worth taking a look at because of its realistic graphics. Sorry I'm being weird now, I've been talking for so long, I'm tired. It's also native here, running under Metal 2.1. At 1080p medium, we're seeing anywhere from 40 to 70 plus FPS. The only thing is that the game has bad frame pacing. I found if I put the screen scaling to like 80% at medium settings, it does improve a little. It's also nice to play the game at 1440p or 2K, high settings with 90% scaling. This provides about 30 to 40 FPS. This farming simulator doesn't benefit from a super high FPS. So for me, this is a good way to appreciate its gorgeous graphics. I did it! I talked about all the games I wanted to. I'm so tired. What are we thinking? What are we thinking of this M3 iMac for gaming? It's a complicated one. For me, it's not very good. It's not the best gaming machine out there, and at the end of the day, it's not really a gaming machine what Mac is, and it wasn't really advertised for this as well. If I was you, if you wanted to get into the Mac gaming space, I would get an M2 Mac Mini. That thing is very good value for money and a very good gaming machine if you want to play games. A gaming machine, I find the word gaming machine with Mac is a hard word to sell because there's no Mac gaming machine, but if you want to play games on a Mac, the M2 Mac Mini is pretty good. This thing, I love this iMac. It's beautiful, and I love this blue color. I love the design, but what I really want from an iMac is 60 FPS at, on this display at a reasonable resolution, and it struggles with the majority of games out there that are on Mac OS, and that's just very disappointing for me. And I also don't understand why Apple didn't put, an M3 Pro or an M3 Max chip in one of these devices. That's a really missed opportunity in my books, because I think this device is way too costly for the value you get if you want to play games. I can see this working quite well in a school environment or a university or in a home where you share the computer. Just for gaming, it's a mixed bag. And I don't know if ray tracing is going to work that well on this bad boy, because it's a bit bad for ray tracing. So yeah, that's all the thoughts I really have. My last question to leave you with is, who is this machine for? Who would want to buy this? Who is the target audience? That's the question I have for you. Thanks for watching.